I always thought betrayal would feel like a stab in the back, sharp, sudden, impossible to miss. But when it actually came, it arrived quietly, wrapped in the soft hum of a phone screen and a friend's casual voice. No alarms, no warning, just a simple sentence that unraveled everything I believed about my family. "Shelby, your sister's wedding was beautiful." The words slid past me at first like I hadn't heard them correctly. I blinked at her, confused, waiting for the punchline for some correction to follow. But it never came. She just kept scrolling through her phone, flipping past photo after photo of smiling faces, my mother, my father, our cousins all gathered under fairy lights, their arms around each other, champagne glasses raised. And then I saw it. The bride, the groom, the wedding I hadn't even known existed. And I wasn't there. My chest tightened as the pictures blurred in front of me, my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't possible. I would have known. Someone would have told me. They couldn't have known. They wouldn't have. I fumbled with my phone, frantically searching through my texts, my emails, my voicemails. Nothing, no invitation, no message. Just the silent, suffocating weight of absence. I should probably back up. My name is Shelby Warren, and until that moment, I believed I was part of a family. Not a perfect one, but a family nonetheless. I grew up with my older sister, Taylor Monroe, who I always thought of as my constant. She was my safe place, my best friend, my protector. If the world ever turned its back on me, I was sure she never would. Looking back now, I see the cracks that were always there. Hairline fractures carefully hidden behind birthday cakes and holiday dinners. Taylor was the responsible one, the achiever, the planner, the one who picked me up from parties when I called crying and patched me up after every heartbreak. And I was the one they adored. It's ugly to admit, but I knew my parents loved me more. Not because I was kinder or smarter. Taylor was always the brilliant one, but because I fit the image they wanted. I smiled more. I didn't challenge them. I played the part, and slowly, quietly, I let her carry the weight of being the outsider. At first, it was small things. My mother forgetting to tell Taylor about family brunches. My father skipping her dance recital because my cheer competition ran late. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Families are complicated. People forget. But somewhere along the way, forgetting became a habit, and I became complicit in the silence. When I got engaged, I thought about Taylor immediately. I wanted her standing beside me. I wanted her advice, her laugh, her steady voice, reminding me not to panic over napkin colors or seating charts. But as wedding plans spiraled, the pressure to keep everyone happy overwhelmed me. My parents, my fiancé, his family, they all had opinions. And when my mother subtly suggested that maybe Taylor wouldn't really fit the bridal party's aesthetic, I didn't push back. She's always been a little distant. My mom whispered, her voice coated in faux concern. She probably wouldn't want to come anyway. I didn't argue. I told myself I would call Taylor later, explain everything, make sure she knew she was still important to me. But I didn't. Weeks slipped by, and the longer I stayed silent, the harder it became to bridge the gap. Somewhere deep down, I convinced myself she wouldn't care. I told myself she had her own life, her own friends, that missing one day wouldn't matter. But when I saw her name flash across my screen after the wedding just once, no voicemail, no follow-up, I knew I'd made a mistake I couldn't undo. I stared at the screen for a long time, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd done. The silence that followed her unanswered call wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was worse. It was final. When I finally reached out weeks later, her voice was distant, cold controlled in a way I'd never heard before. "You didn't forget to invite me," she said softly. "You erased me?" I wanted to argue. I wanted to plead for forgiveness. But she wasn't wrong. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It happened in the choices I made. The silences I allowed, the moments I didn't fight for her when I should have. I abandoned her long before the wedding. I just hadn't been brave enough to face it. People assume family betrayal is always loud. Screaming matches, slammed doors, broken dishes. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the things you didn't say. The invitations you didn't send, the birthdays you stopped remembering. Sometimes it's the silence that echoes loudest. And sometimes by the time you realize what you've lost, it's already too late. The Making of the Golden Child. It's strange how you can live your whole life playing the role that was handed to you without realizing what it cost someone else. Growing up, I always thought I was just lucky. Teachers liked me. Neighbors adored me. My parents beamed when I walked into a room. I didn't understand why Taylor, my sister, always seemed to exist on the fringes. I thought that was just how things were. Some people are made to stand in the spotlight, and some people aren't. At least that's what I told myself. I remember one Christmas vividly. I must have been around 8. I had unwrapped a mountain of gifts, new dolls, a bike, a silver locket with my initials engraved. Taylor, who was 11 at the time, sat quietly beside me. Her pile noticeably smaller. She had a few books, a scarf, and some art supplies, but I didn't think it was odd back then. I didn't notice how her smile looked a little forced when I showed her my shiny new bike. I didn't notice that she stopped bringing up the art classes she'd been begging to attend for months. And when my parents said, "Shelby deserves this, she's been such a good girl this year," I just accepted it as the truth. I didn't question what good meant or who got to decide. Taylor always seemed older than her years. She was responsible, steady, and quietly brilliant in ways I didn't fully appreciate. When I struggled with homework, she would patiently explain things until they made sense. When I was scared of the dark, she would climb into my bed and stay until I fell asleep. She was the one who made my Halloween costumes by hand, the one who remembered which songs I liked, the one who picked me up when our parents forgot. Somehow she was always the second thought. I see it so clearly now, but at the time it just felt normal. When Taylor won a science competition in middle school, my parents barely mentioned it. They didn't frame the certificate or post about it like they did when I won a cheerleading trophy. They didn't come to her debate finals always with some convenient excuse, a client dinner, a sudden meeting traffic too heavy to manage. Taylor's independent, they'd say, as if that justified their absence. Meanwhile, my smallest achievements, good behavior, a decent grade, a cheer routine, were celebrated like I'd cured cancer. Our family photo albums were proof of it, pages and pages of me. Recitals, birthdays, school dances. Taylor was there too, always standing slightly to the side, sometimes even behind the camera. But I was too wrapped up in being adored to notice who was being forgotten. I remember the day Taylor stopped asking them to come to her events. She was around 15. I overheard her on the phone with a friend laughing, but there was a sharp edge to her voice. "They won't show up," she said. "They never do. It's fine. I'm used to it." I wish I'd understood the weight behind those words. I wish I'd gone to more of her competitions, sat in the front row, clapped the loudest. But I didn't. I was busy living in the comfort of being chosen. It didn't start as cruelty. It started as small preferences. They liked how I smiled in pictures. They liked that I was outgoing, that I didn't challenge them, that I played by the unspoken rules. Taylor questioned things. She pushed back. She wanted more. Over time, I learned that if I stayed agreeable, if I fit into the shape they wanted, the rewards kept coming. Birthday parties, surprise trips, extra gifts. I learned to stay quiet when Taylor's name was brushed aside. I learned to turn the other way when my mother would interrupt her to ask me about my day instead. Somewhere deep down, I think Taylor knew it too. She saw the pattern long before I did. And the most painful part, she still loved me. When I was 16 and failed my driving test, I was inconsolable. I sobbed in my room, embarrassed and angry. It was Taylor who sat beside me, holding my hand, telling me I would get it next time. She didn't mention that no one had shown up for her art exhibition the week before, that I'd forgotten to even ask her how it went. That's the kind of person she was. And I let myself believe she would always be there, no matter how many times I let her slip through the cracks. Now I realize I wasn't just the golden child. I was the weapon. My success, my role in the family. It became a wall that kept Taylor outside. And I didn't tear it down. I polished it. I climbed it. I stayed at the top. It's easy to bask in the glow of being favored until you turn around and realize the person who built your ladder is no longer waiting at the bottom. By the time I understood what I'd taken, what I'd allowed, I wasn't sure there was any way to make it right. But I also knew the first step was to stop pretending I didn't see it. And for the first time in my life, I began to ask myself, what does it really mean to be loved when the love comes at someone else's expense? When love becomes sacrifice? For most of my life, I believed that love was supposed to look like sacrifice. That if you love someone, you showed it by showing up, by giving without asking, by carrying their weight when they couldn't carry it themselves. And that's what Taylor always did for me. It's easy now to see that I took it for granted. But back then, it felt like the most natural thing in the world that my sister would always be there to catch me when I fell, to clean up my messes, to be the quiet hero in the background of my life. I remember the first time I really saw what she was willing to give up for me. I was in my final year of high school, lost in the spiral of college applications, part-time work, and a boyfriend who drained me more than he supported me. I was drowning, and it was Taylor who reached out her hand. One night, after another miserable fight with my boyfriend, I called her in tears. I didn't know what I wanted. I just didn't want to be alone. She was in the middle of a project, a deadline she couldn't afford to miss. But she packed up her laptop, canceled whatever she had planned, and drove across town to be with me. She didn't complain. She didn't make me feel guilty. She just sat next to me on my bedroom floor until I ran out of tears. That was Taylor. She showed up even when no one else did. When I struggled to pay the security deposit on my first apartment, I didn't even have to ask. She offered to co-sign, dipping into her own savings to cover the difference. She smiled as if it was no big deal, as if supporting me was just part of the deal when you're an older sister. But I never thought to ask what she was sacrificing to make that happen. I didn't wonder if it meant she had to push back her own plans or if she was giving up things she wanted. Because in my mind, Taylor was the one who didn't need help. She was the strong one, the independent one, the one who always seemed fine. Looking back, I can't count the number of times she said yes when everyone else would have said no. When our parents forgot to pick me up from soccer practice, it was Taylor who would leave work early. When I panicked about final exams, she would stay up all night quizzing me. When my boyfriend dumped me the week before prom, she took me out to dinner and told me I deserved so much more. I never realized that I'd been building my life on her quiet sacrifices. She was the foundation I stood on, and I didn't even see it. At family gatherings, she would slide into the background clearing plates, watching me open gifts while our relatives gushed over me. When she spoke, people often talked over her. When I spoke, everyone listened, and I let it happen. There's a particular memory that still haunts me. I had just landed my first real job after college. My parents threw a small celebration dinner. They gave speeches about how proud they were of me, how I had always been the bright star of the family. Taylor sat silently at the table picking at her food, her expression unreadable. She had just completed a huge project at work, something that would position her for a major promotion. But no one asked her about it. No one even brought it up. I saw her fall into that silence, and I said nothing. I let my family build me up while they quietly erased her. Because part of me liked being the center. Part of me wanted to be the one they bragged about. And Taylor? She let me have it. She handed me that pedestal over and over without asking for anything in return. But love shouldn't have looked like that. I thought I was loving her by leaning on her. I thought I was being a good sister by trusting her to always be there. But all I was doing was taking. I let her pour into me until her cup was empty, and I never once stopped to fill it back up. I realize now that the real betrayal didn't start with the wedding. It didn't begin with the invitations or the seating chart. It began the moment I stopped seeing her as a person with her own needs, her own dreams, her own limits. I let her carry me because it was easier. I let her love me without conditions because I thought she would never leave. But even the strongest people can break. Even the most loyal hearts can grow tired. And when the day came that she walked away, I wasn't angry. I was terrified. Because for the first time, I was forced to ask myself who I was without her holding me up. The truth is, I don't know if I ever really deserved the kind of love Taylor gave me. But I do know that I should have fought harder to give it back. The day I found out, there's a kind of silence that feels like being underwater, heavy, suffocating, pressing into your chest until you forget how to breathe. That's what I remember most about the moment I found out, the silence. The cold, unbearable quiet that wrapped around me when I realized what had happened. I didn't find out from my family. I didn't find out from Taylor. I found out from a stranger. It was a Tuesday. I had stayed late at work, exhausted, my mind tangled in endless to-do lists. I was grabbing coffee with a coworker I barely knew outside of office chatter. She was scrolling through her phone when she smiled and said it so casually, like it was public knowledge. By the way, your sister's wedding photos are gorgeous. She looked stunning. I remember blinking at her, my brain trying to piece together what she'd just said. My sister's wedding. She must have been mistaken. There was no wedding. Not yet. I would have known. I forced a laugh, trying to cover my confusion. Sorry, what did you say? She turned her phone around to show me the photos. I saw them on social media this morning. It looked like a beautiful day. It's funny the things your body remembers when your heart is breaking. I remember the color of her coffee cup, light blue, with a chip on the handle. I remember the tiny crack on the corner of the table. I remember the song playing faintly in the background. What I don't remember is breathing. I took her phone, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pictures. Taylor in a white dress, glowing. Our parents smiling like nothing had ever been fractured. The venue I helped her pick. The flowers we used to talk about. All of it. The day I had pictured 1,000 times in my mind, except I wasn't in any of the photos. Because I wasn't there. I felt my pulse thudding in my ears as I handed the phone back. My coworker kept talking, but her voice faded into static. I told her I had to leave, mumbling something about a deadline I'd forgotten. I stumbled to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and just stared at my phone. There had to be a mistake. I scrolled through my messages. I reread old texts, scanned through emails, checked my voicemail. Nothing. No updates, no changes, no cancellations. The last time I had spoken to Taylor, we were finalizing details. She had even asked me to double-check the playlist. There was no hint, no warning, no sign that I would be left out. It was like someone had erased me from the guest list and simply moved on. I called Taylor straight to voicemail. I called my mom. No answer. I called my dad. Silent. Each unanswered call made my chest tighten further, the weight pressing down until it physically hurt to sit still. Hours later, my mother texted me back. Just one sentence. I thought you knew. The plans changed. That was it. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the storm she had just dropped me into. I called again, desperate now, needing to hear something that would make this make sense. My father picked up. His voice was flat, distracted. She thought you were busy. It was all last minute. Things got hectic. His words hit me like glass, sharp, dismissive, impossible to grasp without bleeding. I was supposed to be there. I whispered, my throat burning. I was supposed to stand next to her. It's over now, he said. Like, that closed the book. You can see the photos. The photos. The ones where I didn't exist. I sat alone in my apartment that night, scrolling through image after image, as if staring at them long enough might somehow pull me into the frame. I couldn't understand how this had happened. How my own sister, my safe place, my constant, had let this unfold without me. I thought about all the times I had shown up for her. Every fight I had comforted her through. Every sacrifice I made. And now when it mattered most, I wasn't even a footnote. The silence stretched between us for days. When Taylor finally called me back, I could barely speak. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask her how I became disposable. Instead, I choked out a single question. Why? Her voice cracked, small and trembling. I thought you'd understand. Understand. Understand what? That I wasn't worth a phone call. That I could be left out of the most important day of her life without a second thought. I hung up before she could finish. Not out of anger, but out of something worse, emptiness. There's no manual for grieving someone who's still alive. No script for mourning a sister who chose to move forward without you. I had always believed there was a line we would never cross. That no matter what, some things were sacred, some things were ours. But as I sat in that unbearable silence, I realized I was wrong. Some lines get crossed without a sound. And sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people you loved most. Finally speaking up. I always thought I would lose them if I told the truth. For as long as I can remember, I lived with this quiet fear. If I said what I really felt, if I admitted I was hurt, I'd somehow rip the family apart. I believed that keeping the peace meant swallowing the pain, that loyalty meant silence. But the day I picked up the phone and finally called my mother, something in me had already shifted. I had crossed a point where the weight of pretending was heavier than the risk of being honest. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was smooth, familiar, perfectly measured, as if nothing had happened. Oh, Shelby, I've been meaning to call you. How's work? There was no mention of the wedding. No apology. No hesitation. Just the same old tone, as if she had forgotten the earthquake she left behind. I steadied my voice, though my hands trembled. Why wasn't I there? I asked, cutting through the small talk. Why wasn't I told? A pause. A long, awkward pause. Her sigh crackled through the receiver like static. We thought you were busy. You've been distant lately. Honestly, you tend to take things so personally. I felt the sharp sting of that familiar tactic. The gaslighting. The subtle rewriting of the story to make me the problem. This isn't about me being sensitive. I said, my voice firm but shaking. This is about being erased. You made a choice and I wasn't part of it. We didn't want to upset you. She continued, a practiced softness in her voice that I now recognized as manipulation. It all happened quickly. Taylor didn't mind. I felt my stomach twist. Taylor didn't mind. I had spent years believing Taylor was my anchor, that even if the rest of the family overlooked me, she never would. But maybe that was just another story I told myself to feel safe. So you just left me out. Like I didn't matter. I whispered. My father's voice suddenly chimed in from the background, loud enough for me to hear. You're making this a bigger deal than it is, Shelby. It's over. Move on. Move on. I realized then that they expected me to sweep this under the rug like I always had. They were counting on me to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to carry the weight of their decision so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. But this time I couldn't. This time something inside me cracked open. No, I said, my voice solidifying. You don't get to erase me and then ask me to move on. My mother's patience began to fray. I really don't understand why you're acting like this. Families make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Families make mistakes. Mistakes are misplacing keys, forgetting a birthday card, arriving late to dinner, not excluding your own daughter from her sister's wedding. It wasn't a mistake, I said quietly but firmly. You didn't forget me. You chose to leave me out. And I've spent my whole life accepting that treatment like it was normal. But it's not. It never was. There was another silence on the line. This one heavier, more deliberate. The kind that stretches out. Because no one knows what to say when their power starts slipping away. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I wasn't begging to be seen. I wasn't twisting myself into something smaller to fit inside their version of family. I was simply telling the truth. You've always made me feel like I had to earn my place. I continued. Like love was conditional. Like I was valuable only when I stayed in line and didn't make noise. That's not fair. My mother shot back, her voice rising now. You're twisting this. I'm finally untwisting it, I said. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. I don't know what reaction I expected. Maybe outrage, maybe denial, maybe even tears. But what I got was worse, dismissiveness. Well, my father said with a clipped edge, you've made your point. Let's not drag this out. Drag this out as if this was an inconvenience to be tidied away, as if my pain was nothing more than a spill on the kitchen floor. I think that's when I knew there was nothing left to fight for in that conversation. This won't just go away. I told them, my voice steady now, and I won't go back to pretending it didn't happen. We're still family. My mother murmured the words laced with something that might have once been guilt. Family doesn't treat people like they're disposable, I replied. At least not the kind of family I want to be part of. And then I hung up. Not in anger, not in rage, but in release. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like a grand moment of revenge. It just felt necessary. Like setting something heavy down after carrying it for far too long. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over the version of family they offered. And it terrified me. But it also freed me. The quiet exit. I always thought leaving would look like a dramatic door slam. I pictured angry words, tears on the sidewalk, a final goodbye that echoed like a slammed chapter. But when I walked away from my family, there was no explosion. There was just quiet. The day after I hung up that phone, the weight of what I'd done settled on my chest like a slow creeping fog. I had drawn a line. I had stepped outside the only circle I'd ever known. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel strong. I felt unmoored, floating somewhere I couldn't name. I started by silencing my phone. No more jumping every time a message from my mother appeared. No more checking my inbox for rushed apologies that never came. I muted them. Not because I hated them, but because I couldn't hear their noise anymore without unraveling. I thought distance would feel like punishment, but it didn't. It felt like breathing. For the first time in years, I noticed the silence of my apartment. I noticed the way the morning light fell on my kitchen counter. I noticed how little I actually knew about myself when I wasn't busy chasing their approval. I had spent so much of my life folding myself to fit their image of who I was supposed to be. The easy one, the forgiving one, the good daughter. I didn't even know what I wanted when no one else was telling me who I should be. At first, the distance felt like guilt. I kept waiting for a surge of regret to pull me back, for that familiar ache to convince me I'd gone too far. But it didn't come. What came instead were the tiny moments I'd spent years denying myself. I started saying no. No to weekend visits I didn't want. No to family obligations wrapped in guilt. No to sitting quietly while someone else's story took priority over my own. And every no became a brick in the foundation of the life I was finally beginning to build. I leaned into work not as an escape, but as something that could actually belong to me. I threw myself into projects I'd once doubted I could handle. And to my surprise, I didn't just manage, I excelled. I got promoted. I earned respect. And for the first time, I wasn't working to prove anything to my family. I was doing it for me. It was strange and beautiful to realize that my success could stand on its own without needing to be paraded in front of them for validation. I found friendships I had been too busy to nurture before. I said yes to last-minute dinners, to weekend trips, to movie nights where no one kept score. Slowly, I began to build something that felt suspiciously like a family, except this one didn't ask me to shrink. I met people who liked me not because I fit into their mold, but because I didn't. People who loved me for the exact shape I was. There were moments, of course, when I doubted myself. I'd stand in the grocery store and wonder if I should text my mother. I'd hear a song that reminded me of Taylor and feel the ache bloom in my chest. There were nights I'd lie awake questioning whether I'd made the right choice, whether I had burned a bridge I would one day need. But those moments were fewer than I expected. And when they came, I let them pass like weather, temporary, uncomfortable but survivable. Leaving didn't mean I stopped loving them. I just stopped abandoning myself to keep their love. I kept thinking back to something a friend had told me once. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I used to think love was about sacrifice, about how much I was willing to give up to stay connected. But maybe real love isn't supposed to cost you your sense of self. Maybe it's not about how much you can carry for someone else, but how much you're allowed to be fully yourself while standing next to them. As the months passed, I realized something quietly beautiful. I wasn't missing family. I was missing the idea of family. The version I had chased in my head. The one where I mattered equally. The one where I was seen and heard and chosen. But that version never really existed. It was a dream I clung to so tightly that I couldn't see the reality that had always been in front of me. Walking away allowed me to stop chasing a seat at their table and start building my own. I filled it with friends who called just to check in, with coworkers who valued my ideas, with moments that didn't come wrapped in guilt or expectation. It wasn't perfect. Some days the loneliness crept in. Some days the silence still stung. But I no longer felt trapped in a story I didn't write. The life I was building wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about choosing something better. It was about choosing me. The quiet wins they never saw coming. The funny thing about walking away is that people don't notice you're gone until your absence starts making noise. At first, it seemed like no one cared. Days passed, then weeks. I expected my phone to light up with apologies, some desperate attempt to pull me back in. But the silence from my family was deafening. It was almost as if they assumed I'd eventually fall back into place like I always had. But I didn't. I kept going. I kept building. And for the first time, I started to win quietly, steadily, without needing their permission. My job became my safe place. I stopped shrinking in meetings, stopped second-guessing my ideas, stopped filtering myself to sound like the version of me my parents used to praise. I showed up as me, unapologetic, direct, and fully present. And it worked. I started leading projects. My coworkers began asking for my input. Clients remembered my name. I wasn't the shadow of someone else's success. I wasn't Taylor's sister. I wasn't the second daughter. I was simply Shelby. There's a particular day I'll never forget, a team presentation I led where our pitch landed the company's biggest account of the year. Afterward, my boss pulled me aside, her eyes bright with admiration. You carried that room, she said. They trusted you. You owned it. I walked back to my apartment that night, smiling to myself. I didn't rush to call my parents. I didn't crave their approval. It was mine and that was enough. The life I was quietly building outside of my family began to feel solid, real like a house that wouldn't collapse if someone else stopped holding it up. I started filling my weekends with people who saw me, people who chose me, friends who didn't make me beg for attention, friends who invited me not out of obligation, but out of genuine joy. We had dinners that stretched into long nights filled with laughter and stories where no one was competing to be heard. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be included because I belonged, not because someone felt guilty. I found joy in simple things, weekend hikes, early morning coffees, quiet walks through art galleries. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of playing the role my family assigned me. I even picked up photography, capturing moments that felt like mine alone. City streets at dawn, people deep in conversation, sunlight catching on the edge of a window. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And slowly, without realizing it, my family started to notice the space I'd left behind. The first message came from my mother. "We haven't heard from you. Hope you're okay." There was no mention of the wedding. No apology. Just a vague attempt to test the waters. I didn't answer. A few weeks later, my father sent a text. "There's a family dinner coming up. Your sister's bringing some friends. You can stop by if you want." As if nothing had happened. As if I was expected to slide back into the chair I'd abandoned. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I didn't crave a seat at their table. I was building my own. When Taylor finally reached out, her message caught me off guard. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything. I'm sorry. Just 2 words, but they felt different from the rest. I didn't reply right away. I needed to sit with it. To feel whether it was real or just another band-aid to cover a deeper wound. Over time, I let Taylor back in slowly, carefully. We met for coffee, not as sisters desperately clinging to the past, but as 2 people trying to find out if there was something worth salvaging. She told me things I hadn't expected to hear. That she had realized too late how much she'd let slip away. That the version of me she loved was the one who always showed up, always forgave, always bent. And that maybe she'd gotten used to that version of me because it made her life easier. "I didn't know how to be your sister without taking from you," she admitted quietly. "And I didn't realize until you disappeared that I'd never given you space to have your own story." We weren't magically fixed after that conversation. Real relationships don't work that way. But for the first time, we were talking without the weight of performance, without pretending everything was fine. Meanwhile, my mother began to tread more carefully. She stopped brushing off my feelings as dramatic. My father, too, started listening. In those rare moments when we spoke. The shift wasn't grand, but it was there subtle. Like the changing of seasons. The family I had left behind didn't collapse without me, but they did start to notice the shape of my absence. And in that space, I flourished. The sweetest part, they couldn't ignore me anymore, not because I forced them to see me, but because I stopped needing them to. My success didn't come from revenge. It came from finally writing my own story one, where I didn't need to beg for love or prove my worth. Sometimes the greatest wins are the ones no one expects you to have. Sometimes the loudest victories are the quiet ones you claim for yourself. Choosing my own family. I used to think family was something you were born into, a name, a bloodline, a history you couldn't rewrite. I thought it was permanent, immovable. Like the walls of a house you just had to learn to live inside, no matter how small it made you feel. But I was wrong. Family isn't a prison, and it isn't a birthright. It's a choice. It took me a long time to understand that. I spent years twisting myself into shapes that would fit the blueprint my family laid out for me. I tried to be the good daughter, the easy sister, the silent one. I thought that if I followed the script closely enough, eventually I would be loved the way I wanted to be. But love, real love, isn't earned through sacrifice. It doesn't arrive with conditions. It doesn't wait for you to be perfect. The turning point came quietly, almost without me noticing. It wasn't some grand epiphany. It was the slow build of new traditions, new people, new homes, the friends who became my constants, the coworkers who became confidants, the people who invited me. Not because they felt obligated, but because they genuinely wanted me there. I remember one particular evening, a simple dinner at my friend Jenna's apartment. The table was crowded with mismatched chairs, cheap takeout containers, and inside jokes that made us laugh until our ribs ached. No one was competing to be heard. No one was waiting to be seen. I was simply included, effortlessly, fully, and in that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen me with no strings attached. I realized I'd already built something I thought I'd lost. A family, not the one I was born into, the one I created. There were no silent expectations at that table, no quiet punishments for taking up too much space, no emotional contracts that required me to shrink to be loved. Here I didn't have to apologize for existing. That dinner became our ritual every Thursday night. Sometimes 5 of us, sometimes 10, sometimes more food than we could eat. Sometimes just the comfort of being in a room where I didn't have to prove I belonged. And slowly I stopped mourning the seat I'd abandoned at my family's table. Because I built my own, I found new traditions, weekend hikes, random road trips, game nights that lasted until sunrise. I created spaces where I could be loud, messy, imperfect, and still loved. The ache of being excluded from Taylor's wedding never completely disappeared. There are still days when I see old photos or hear a story I wasn't part of, and something sharp twists in my chest. But those moments don't define me anymore. They don't control me. They remind me where I've been, but they no longer decide where I'm going. Taylor and I eventually rebuilt something between us. It's different now, lighter, more honest, held together, not by obligation, but by mutual effort. We don't pretend anymore. We don't sweep things under the rug. She knows I won't shrink to make her comfortable, and she's finally learning how to love me without needing me to disappear. We still stumble. Some conversations still carry the weight of the past, but we move through them with more grace, more truth, more understanding. My parents, they remain at a distance. Our relationship is polite now, but no longer central. They stopped expecting me to orbit around them. I stopped expecting them to change. And that's okay. Not every story ends with a perfectly tied bow. Some endings are quieter. Some resolutions live in the simple act of letting go. The freedom I found wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft. It was steady. It was built piece by piece over time. I found freedom in the Thursday night dinners, in the hands that reached for mine without hesitation, in the people who cheered for me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I used to chase their approval like it was oxygen, convinced I couldn't survive without it. But I've learned how to breathe on my own. And now I'm breathing just fine. I still get the occasional text from my mother, short and neutral. My father sometimes forwards family updates. But I no longer feel that pull to race back. I no longer crave a seat I was once so desperate to claim. I've carved out a life where I am fully seen, fully chosen, and fully enough, without bending, without shrinking, without begging. My story didn't unfold the way I imagined. I didn't get the picture-perfect family. I didn't get the redemption arc where everyone finally understands me. But I did get something better. I got to choose myself. And sometimes the most radical, powerful thing you can do, the truest revenge, the deepest healing, is simply to live well. To love the people who love you back. To build your own table, your own traditions, your own version of home. I am no longer knocking on locked doors. I am no longer waiting to be let in. I am exactly where I need to be, and I finally understand that is enough. Life lessons I carry with me. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love should never come at the cost of losing yourself. For years, I believed family loyalty meant unconditional tolerance. I thought I had to accept being overlooked, sidelined, and quietly erased because that's just how families are. I told myself that if I kept giving, kept showing up, kept bending, eventually, they would see me. Eventually, they would choose me. But here's the truth. No one told me love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependence. It's control. It's a cycle that convinces you to trade your dignity for a seat at a table where you're always served last. The most painful part of my story wasn't being excluded from my sister's wedding. It was realizing how many years I had willingly accepted crumbs believing it was enough. I wish I could tell you that standing up for myself was easy. It wasn't. I wish I could say that setting boundaries immediately brought peace. It didn't. In fact, it was one of the hardest, loneliest, most disorienting things I've ever done. But it was also the most important thing I've ever done. Sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't against others. They're against the stories we've told ourselves about what we deserve. If you're in a place where you feel like you have to constantly prove your worth, whether to your family, your partner, your friends, or even yourself, I want you to know you can stop. Right now, you can choose something different. You can choose to build a life where you're valued just as you are, not for what you can do, or how small you can make yourself to fit someone else's comfort. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned is that you don't have to stay in spaces where you feel invisible. You don't have to keep knocking on doors that never open. You can walk away. You can build new tables, new traditions, new families made up of people who choose you with open hands, not with silent expectations. I know leaving can feel terrifying. The guilt, the second guessing, the fear of losing what little you have, it's real. But what's waiting for you on the other side of that fear might just change your life. When I finally stepped away from the version of family that required me to shrink, I found people who let me take up space. I found joy in places I'd never looked before. I found freedom in simply saying I am enough. And you are too. Please don't wait as long as I did to believe that.